As exciting as the pulley was, it was not the biggest discovery of the day. Just as the team was shifting their focus to their next steps, Charles Barkhouse walked in with something that would throw everyone into a frenzy. He had brought them an artifact that had the potential to change everything they thought they knew about Oak Island. Charles revealed that a Roman sword had been discovered in Mahone Bay, just off the coast of Oak Island. It had been found back in the 1940s by a local family who had been illegally scalloping in the area. Instead of reporting the discovery, they kept it hidden for decades, passing it down through generations. Now, after years of secrecy, the artifact had finally come into the hands of the Oak Island team. The sword itself was a bronze or brass weapon with a distinct hilt, which immediately caught their attention. It was heavier than expected, with an ornate design that seemed far too intricate for anything made in recent history. The hilt featured a carving of Hercules, which is a symbol commonly associated with ancient Roman military decorations. This weapon really looked ancient. Finding a Roman artifact in North America is unheard of. As far as mainstream history is concerned, the Romans never set foot anywhere near Oak Island. Their empire stretched through Europe, parts of the Middle East and North Africa, but it never crossed the Atlantic. So what was this sword doing buried near Mahone Bay? Theories started flying immediately. Some believed the sword was absolute proof that Romans had been here, somehow managing to travel across the ocean centuries before Columbus or Norse explorers. Others were more skeptical, arguing that even if the sword was authentic, that did not necessarily mean Romans had personally left it behind. It could have been brought here later, maybe by European collectors, maybe through trade routes that had carried artifacts much farther than most historians assume. The team knew speculation was not enough. They needed proof. The only way to be sure was to have the sword tested by experts. They took it to St. Mary's University in Halifax, where specialists in archaeology and metallurgy could analyze it. If this was a true Roman artifact, it would change everything people thought they knew about early transatlantic travel. The first expert to examine the sword, Dr. Miles McCallum, noted that it looked similar to ceremonial weapons given to gladiators and high-ranking Roman officers. That was an exciting start. The hilt featured a figure believed to be Hercules, which lined up with Roman symbolism. The sword itself had the right shape, the right size, and the right balance for a piece dating back nearly 2,000 years. But none of that was conclusive on its own. The most important test was yet to come. To determine if the sword was really ancient, scientists performed a chemical analysis. The idea was that if the metal composition matched what Romans used, that would be a strong argument for its authenticity. If it contained materials associated with more modern manufacturing, then it was likely a reproduction. When the results came in, they were frustratingly inconclusive. Some of the elements did match Roman metallurgy. There were traces of copper, tin, lead, and even a small amount of arsenic, all consistent with ancient Roman bronze. That was a good sign, but there was a catch. The way the sword was cast did not quite fit known Roman techniques. Instead of being made through the traditional lost wax method, the sword seemed to have been cast in a bivalve mold. This was a problem. Roman blacksmiths typically did not use this kind of mold, at least not for weapons like this. The technique suggested a later time period, possibly medieval or even early modern. That led to a new theory. The sword could be an antique, but not necessarily from the Roman era. Some experts suggested it might have been created in the 18th or 19th century, inspired by Roman designs. Maybe it had been a collector's item, brought to Oak Island much later. Or perhaps it had even been deliberately placed there by someone who wanted to add to the mystery of the island. That last possibility was not as far-fetched as it sounded. Oak Island has a long history of attracting treasure hunters, and over the years plenty of people have tried to leave their mark on the legend. Maybe the sword was part of an elaborate hoax, or maybe it was really an ancient relic that had somehow made its way across the ocean long before anyone thought it possible. The team was not ready to give up. They sought a second opinion, bringing in Dr. Krista Brosseau, who is a chemistry professor specializing in metal analysis. She conducted a more detailed scan and found something unexpected. The sword contained a high amount of zinc. That raised eyebrows. Zinc was not typically used in ancient Roman bronze, at least not in high concentrations. That suggested the sword was modern brass, not ancient bronze. If that was true, it meant the sword was not from the Roman era. That was a massive blow to the theory that Romans had been here. But not everyone was convinced. Some pointed out that certain ancient mines contained naturally occurring zinc, which could have ended up in Roman bronze through natural contamination. Others argued that the presence of zinc didn't necessarily mean the sword was fake. It just meant more tests were needed. The debate only got more intense when comparisons were made to other similar swords found in Europe. It turned out that museums in Italy and Spain had almost identical swords, and those had already been classified as replicas made in the 1800s. That didn't look good for the Oak Island sword. If the same model existed elsewhere and had been proven to be a reproduction, it seemed unlikely that this one was any different. But then came another twist. Some historians argued that just because replicas existed didn't automatically mean this particular sword was one of them. Maybe the design had been copied from an actual ancient artifact, and maybe the Oak Island sword was the original, and the ones in Europe were copies. At this point, things were a mess. Some experts insisted the sword was a modern fake, nothing more than a product of 19th century craftsmanship. Others believed it still had the potential to be a genuine ancient artifact, pointing to the metal composition and its unique discovery location. And of course, there were those who felt the whole thing was just another dead end in Oak Island's long history of wild theories and false leads. One thing was certain. The discovery has sparked one of the biggest controversies in the island's history. Whether real or fake, the Roman sword had everyone talking. But the exciting thing is that this sword is not the only Roman artifact found in this region. Other findings over the years. Oak Island has been teasing treasure hunters and history buffs for over 2 centuries. Every time someone thinks they are close to figuring out its secrets, the island throws them another mystery. People have poured money, sweat, and even their lives into uncovering what's buried beneath the surface, and while they haven't yet found the legendary treasure, they have dug up some seriously strange things. One of the biggest puzzles is the discovery of objects that don't seem to belong. You would expect to find old tools, coins, and maybe even some pirate relics. But Oak Island has a habit of serving up things that have no logical reason to be there. And that includes what some claim to be Roman artifacts. Now, if the Romans really were here, that would shake up everything we know about history. The official story is that they never set foot anywhere near North America. Yet here we are with multiple discoveries suggesting otherwise. Take, for example, the Roman-style crossbow bolts. These small, sharp projectiles were found on the island, and they match the design of bolts used by the Roman military. How did they end up here? Some argue they could have arrived via trade routes much later in history, maybe even during the age of European exploration. But others insist this could mean the Romans, or at least someone carrying their weapons, visited this part of the world long before Columbus or the Vikings. Then there is the famous lead cross discovered at Smith's Cove. This one is still debated to this day. The cross, made of lead with a design resembling medieval Templar symbols, was buried under layers of sediment. Some researchers believe it is linked to the Knights Templar, a mysterious order that supposedly traveled across the Atlantic to hide their treasures. But another theory suggests it could be even older, possibly dating back to the Roman period. If true, that would be massive. The cross was analyzed, and the lead composition was traced back to southern France, an area under Roman rule at one point. This could mean an ancient expedition reached Oak Island centuries before anyone thought it possible. Another curious find is the inscribed stone known as the 90-foot stone. Discovered deep in the infamous Money Pit, this large rock contains symbols that no one could immediately decipher. Over the years, researchers have tried to crack the code, and some believe the markings resemble Phoenician or Roman-era scripts. Now, the stone itself mysteriously disappeared in the early 1900s. Because of course it did. This is Oak Island, where nothing stays simple, but records of its inscription still exist. If the markings do have Roman origins, that would suggest someone with knowledge of their writing system was on the island centuries ago. Let's not forget the strange stone roads and platforms uncovered beneath Smith's Cove. These are not natural formations. Someone deliberately built them, and they don't match the construction techniques of colonial-era settlers. Some researchers believe these structures resemble ancient European engineering, possibly even connected to Roman aqueducts or roads. Maybe this is another clue pointing to pre-Columbian visitors, or maybe this is simply the work of early explorers setting up base centuries later. Another huge debate started when a Roman coin was allegedly found near Oak Island. The problem was that no one knew exactly where it came from. If authentic, it could mean Roman merchants somehow ended up in this region, but coins are tricky. They travel. They get lost, traded, and passed down for centuries. Just because a Roman coin turns up somewhere does not mean Romans were there. Still, it raises questions. Why would a coin from ancient Rome be anywhere near Oak Island?